The Wyoming wind carried more dust than promise that spring of 1887. It whipped across the barren stretches of land, rattling the wooden shutters of Willow Creek's general store and sending tumbleweeds dancing down the empty Main Street. The town sat isolated in the valley, a collection of weathered buildings that seemed to huddle together against the vast, unforgiving landscape. Samuel Carter pulled his hat low against the stinging grit as he guided his horse down the familiar trail. 3 weeks he'd been out with the herd, moving them to fresh grazing land, sleeping under stars that offered cold comfort. His clothes bore the evidence of hard living, dust caked in every fold, sweat stains marking the collar of his worn shirt. At 32, he'd spent half his life working this unforgiving land, and it showed in the deep lines around his eyes and the permanent sun weathering of his skin. The ranch house appeared through the haze, modest but sturdy, built by his father's hands 20 years prior. Sam dismounted, bones protesting the movement, and led his horse to the water trough. That's when he spotted it. A letter tucked into the doorframe, the envelope bearing the careful script of someone trying to make a good impression. His heart quickened despite himself. He'd sent his own letter to the matrimonial agency nearly 2 months ago, when his mother's coughing had turned to blood and her strong hands had grown frail. She needed help he couldn't provide, and the ranch needed a woman's touch, someone quiet, hard-working, and respectable, as he'd carefully penned in his request. Inside, the house felt too quiet. Sam found his mother propped in her bed, her face gaunt but eyes still sharp as flint. Margaret Carter had been a formidable woman once, breaking horses alongside her husband, raising her son with equal measures of love and steel. Now she seemed to shrink a little more each day. "You're back," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's soup on the stove." "Got a letter, Ma." He held up the envelope, trying to keep the hope out of his voice. Her eyes brightened. "Open it, then. Don't keep an old woman waiting." Sam's fingers, rough from rope work, fumbled with the delicate paper. The letter was brief, written in the same careful hand. "Mr. Carter, I am writing in response to your advertisement. My name is Elise Winters. I am 26 years old. Can cook, clean, and keep house. I am not afraid of hard work and seek an honest situation. If you find me suitable, I can arrive by train within the month. Respectfully, Miss E. Winters." "Well?" Margaret prompted. "She sounds proper, says she can work." Sam folded the letter carefully. "I'll wire the money for her passage." His mother's thin hand found his. "Samuel, you remember what I told you? Find someone decent, someone who won't bring shame to this family. We've had enough hardship." He squeezed her fingers gently. "I know, Ma." 3 weeks later, Sam stood on the platform as the train wheezed to a stop, black smoke billowing into the clear morning sky. His best shirt chafed against his neck, and he'd even attempted to tame his dark hair with pomade borrowed from the barber. Other men waited too, some openly eager, others affecting indifference as they watched for their mail-order brides. The passengers began to disembark. Families reunited with tears and laughter. Businessmen strode past with purpose. And then he saw her. She appeared in the doorway of the passenger car, gripping the handrail with white knuckles, even from a distance. Sam could see something was wrong with her gait. She descended slowly, each step deliberate and careful. When she reached the platform, she paused, scanning the crowd with gray eyes that held too much wariness for someone so young. Elise Winters was pretty in a delicate way, with light brown hair pinned beneath a simple bonnet and a traveling dress that had seen better days. But it was her movement that made Sam's stomach sink. She limped, favoring her right leg heavily. Each step an obvious effort. This wasn't what he'd paid for. This wasn't what he'd asked for. She spotted him, perhaps recognizing him from the description he'd sent, and began making her painful way across the platform. Sam stood frozen, his mind racing. His mother needed help. Yes, but from someone who could work, who could handle the demands of ranch life. How could a crippled woman manage? "Mr. Carter?" Her voice was soft, barely audible above the noise of the station. "Up close." He could see the fine tremor in her hands, the way she seemed to brace for rejection. Miss Winters. He couldn't mask his disappointment entirely, saw the way it hit her like a physical blow. "I can work," she said quickly, desperately. "I know I'm not—" "I know how I look, but I can work. I'll stay. I won't be trouble." The words tumbled out in a whisper that spoke of other rejections, other disappointments. Something in her eyes, that mixture of pride and pleading, made him hesitate. The other men on the platform were already leaving with their brides, some couples talking animatedly, others maintaining awkward silence. "The ranch is 20 miles out," he said finally. "It's a hard life." "I'm not afraid of hard work." She straightened as much as she could, chin lifting. "I wouldn't have come if I was—" Sam looked at her worn dress, the careful mending at the hem, the boots that were quality once but now showed years of wear. He thought of his mother, growing weaker each day. He thought of the empty house, the pile of washing, the garden going to seed. "Wagons this way," he said gruffly, turning before he could see the relief flood her features. The ride to the ranch passed in near silence. Elise sat rigid beside him, hands folded in her lap, occasionally wincing when the wagon hit a particularly deep rut. Sam found himself taking the smoother paths, though it added time to their journey. The landscape rolled out before them, endless stretches of scrub grass, distant mountains painted purple against the horizon, the occasional cluster of cottonwoods marking a creek bed. A red-tailed hawk circled overhead, its cry lonely in the vast sky. "It's bigger than I imagined," Elise said softly, her first words since leaving town. "Bigger and emptier." Sam agreed. "Nearest neighbor is 8 miles. Town's a half-day ride when the weather's good." She absorbed this information quietly, her eyes taking in the foreign terrain. As they crested a rise, the ranch came into view. The main house, the barn, a few outbuildings, all of it dwarfed by the immensity of the land around it. "Home," Sam said, the word carrying neither welcome nor warning, simply statement of fact. That evening, after settling Elise in the small storage room they'd cleared for her arrival, Sam sat with his mother as she picked at her dinner. "What's she like?" Margaret asked. Sam considered his words carefully. "Quiet, polite, young." "That's not what I'm asking, and you know it." He met his mother's knowing gaze. "She's lame, Ma, bad leg. Don't know how much use she'll be." Margaret was quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who've been broken. Give her a chance, Samuel. We all deserve that much." Later, as Sam made his final rounds, checking the horses and securing the barn, he noticed a light still burning in the storage room window. Through the gap in the curtains, he could see Elise unpacking her few belongings, carefully hanging 2 dresses on the hooks he'd installed. She moved slowly but steadily, testing her weight with each step, learning the dimensions of her new space. When she finally sat on the narrow bed, he saw her bury her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with what could only be tears. But when she raised her head, she wiped her cheeks with determination and continued unpacking, pulling out a small sewing kit and a Bible wrapped in brown paper. Sam turned away, uncomfortable with witnessing such private grief. The night stretched around him, vast and dark, filled with the sound of coyotes in the distance. A storm was building on the horizon, lightning flickering in the bellies of gathering clouds. The air tasted of change, of challenge. He thought of the woman now under his roof, not what he'd expected, not what he'd wanted, but here nonetheless. Tomorrow would bring its tests. The ranch didn't coddle anyone, least of all those who couldn't pull their weight. But tonight, at least, she had a roof and a bed. The wind picked up, sending dust devils spinning across the yard. Sam pulled his collar higher and headed inside, where his mother's labored breathing and a stranger's presence marked the beginning of something he couldn't yet name. In the distance, thunder rumbled like a warning, and the first fat drops of rain began to fall, striking the parched earth with the force of tiny hammers. The first week tested everyone's patience. Elise rose before dawn each day, determined to prove her worth despite the obvious pain each movement caused. Sam watched from the kitchen window as she struggled with the water pump, her weak leg nearly buckling under the weight of the full bucket. Pride kept her from asking for help, and something, perhaps his own stubborn nature, kept him from offering it. The washing proved the hardest task. The heavy, wet clothes demanded strength she didn't possess, and more than once Sam found her slumped against the washboard, catching her breath. But by the time he'd returned from the fields, the clothes would be hanging on the line, even if it had taken her twice as long as it should have. In the kitchen, she fared better. Her biscuits were light, her stew hearty, and she somehow managed to stretch their meager supplies into filling meals. Sam ate in silence, offering neither complaint nor compliment, while his mother watched them both with knowing eyes. "You're too thin," Margaret told Elise one morning, patting the bench beside her bed. "Sit with me a spell." Elise perched carefully on the edge, her hands never still, always mending, always working. "I should check the bread. Mrs. Carter, the bread will keep. You won't, at this pace." Margaret's voice held the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Samuel told me you came from back east." "Pennsylvania, ma'am. Long way to travel for this." Margaret gestured weakly at the window, where the endless prairie stretched brown and unforgiving. "What made you answer his advertisement?" Elise's needle paused in its rhythm. "I needed a new situation, somewhere far from whoever hurt you." Margaret finished gently. The younger woman's eyes flew to hers, wide with surprise and something like fear. "I've lived long enough to recognize the look," Margaret said. "We all carry our wounds differently, some on the outside, some buried deep." They sat in companionable silence until Elise whispered, "There was a fire. At the factory where I worked, I was trapped under a beam when the floor collapsed. My fiancé, he said he couldn't marry a cripple. My family, they had too many mouths to feed already." Margaret reached over and squeezed Elise's hand. "Their loss, my dear, their loss." That afternoon, visitors arrived. Sam recognized the wagon long before it reached the yard. Tom and Ruth Morrison from the neighboring ranch, come to inspect the new arrival. Ruth Morrison had opinions about everything and everyone, and she shared them freely, whether asked or not. "So, this is your mail-order bride," Ruth announced, looking Elise up and down like she was examining the livestock. "Bit scrawny, isn't she?" Elise stood in the doorway, color high in her cheeks but chin raised. "Would you care for some coffee, Mrs. Morrison?" "I suppose." Ruth settled her bulk into a kitchen chair, while Tom and Sam discussed cattle prices on the porch. "Though I doubt you've learned to make it properly yet. Western coffee takes a particular hand." Elise served the coffee without comment, though Sam noticed her hand trembled slightly as she poured. Ruth took a sip and wrinkled her nose. "As I thought. Too weak." Her eyes traveled to Elise's uneven gait as she moved back to the stove. "I heard you were lame. Bought yourself a husband, did you? Well, I suppose even damaged goods can find a buyer if the price is right." The words hung in the air like a slap. Sam, entering just in time to hear them, saw Elise's knuckles go white as she gripped the coffee pot. "That's enough, Ruth," he said quietly. "I'm only speaking the truth. Samuel Carter, mail-order brides are already a questionable practice. But when they come broken, I said enough." His voice carried the edge that made cattle think twice about challenging him. "Tom, I think it's time you headed home." After they left, Sam found Elise behind the house, tears streaming down her face as she scrubbed viciously at an already clean pot. She startled when she saw him, quickly wiping her cheeks with her apron. "I'm sorry," she said. "I should be stronger. Ruth Morrison's got a tongue sharp enough to flay hide." Sam interrupted. "Pay her no mind." Elise nodded, but he could see the words had found their mark. That night at dinner, she barely touched her food and retired early to her small room. Sam sat on the porch, smoking his pipe and watching the stars emerge. His mother's words echoed in his mind. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who've been broken. He thought of Elise's determination, the way she pushed through pain without complaint. the quiet dignity she maintained even under Ruth's cruel assessment. When he finally went inside, he noticed light seeping under her door and heard the soft sound of crying. He stood there, hand raised to knock, then let it fall. What comfort could he offer? He'd brought her here, to this hard place where even her best efforts would never be enough for people like Ruth Morrison. The next morning, Elise was at the stove before he woke, moving stiffly but steadily. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. But she served his breakfast with the same quiet efficiency as always. "I'm driving to town today," he said. "Need supplies." "I've made a list," she said, sliding a carefully written paper across the table. "If it's not too much trouble." He glanced at it. Basic necessities. Nothing frivolous. At the bottom, she'd written wool yarn and then crossed it out. "You knit." "When I have materials." She busied herself at the wash basin. "But it's not necessary." Sam pocketed the list, including the crossed-out item. When he returned that evening, he placed a skein of soft blue yarn on the kitchen table without comment. The smile that briefly lit her face was worth the extra $1 it had cost. As the days passed, a routine developed. Elise learned to work around her limitations, finding ways to accomplish tasks that accommodated her weakness. She dragged a stool to the clothesline so she could sit while hanging laundry. She prepared vegetables sitting at the table rather than standing at the counter. Small adaptations that Sam pretended not to notice but filed away nonetheless. One evening, he returned to find her asleep at the kitchen table, her head pillowed on her arms next to a pile of his mended shirts. In the lamplight, he could see the exhaustion etched in her features, and something else, a bruise darkening on her ankle where she'd wrapped it, evidence of a fall she hadn't mentioned. Without thinking, he bent and lifted her carefully. She weighed next to nothing, bird bones and determination. She stirred but didn't wake as he carried her to her room, setting her gently on the narrow bed. As he pulled a quilt over her, he caught her scent, soap and sunshine, and something indefinable, like prairie grass after rain. It stirred something in him he'd thought dead, a tenderness he'd buried along with his father 10 years ago. He left quickly, disturbed by the feeling. This was a business arrangement. Nothing more. She needed a home. He needed help with his mother and the house. Simple, practical. But that night, as he lay in his own bed listening to his mother's labored breathing through the thin walls, he found himself thinking of Elise's smile when she'd seen the yarn, the way her fingers had traced the soft fibers like they were precious. Outside, a screech owl called, its cry lonely in the darkness. Sam turned over, punching his pillow into shape, and tried not to think about the woman sleeping down the hall, or the way she'd felt in his arms, or the bruises she hid beneath her long sleeves and careful movements. The ranch was no place for softness. It demanded strength, resilience, the ability to endure. But watching Elise these past days, Sam was beginning to understand that strength came in forms he'd never recognized before. She might stumble, might fall, but she got up again. Every time. And somewhere between her arrived and now, she'd stopped being the crippled mail-order bride in his mind and had become simply Elise, who made the best biscuits he'd ever tasted, who sang softly to herself while she worked, who treated his dying mother with a tenderness that made the old woman smile for the first time in months. It wasn't love. Sam wouldn't let it be that. But it was something. A recognition, perhaps a beginning. The morning sun painted the grasslands gold as Sam watched Elise approach the corral. She'd been observing him work with the horses for weeks, and yesterday she'd finally asked if she could learn to ride. He'd almost refused. The thought of her fragile frame on horseback seemed like courting disaster, but the determination in her eyes changed his mind. "This is Belle," he said, leading out his gentlest mare. "She's got more patience than most." Elise ran her hand along Belle's neck, and the horse nickered softly. "She's beautiful." Beautiful don't mean much out here. Steady and sensible, that's what counts. He demonstrated how to check the saddle, tighten the girth. "You sure about this? I need to be able to help more," Elise said simply. If I can ride, I can check the closer pastures, maybe help move the chickens to fresh ground. Sam helped her mount, his hand steadying her waist as she struggled with her weak leg. Once in the saddle, she gripped the horn white-knuckled but sat straight. "Breathe," he told her. "Belle can feel if you're scared. Just breathe and move with her." For the next hour, he led them around the corral. Elise fell twice, the second time hard enough to knock the wind from her lungs, but each time she pulled herself up and climbed back on. By the end, she could manage a slow walk on her own, her face glowing with accomplishment despite the dust and sweat. That evening, Sam found her soaking her feet in a basin of hot water, skirts hiked to her knees. She startled when she saw him, quickly pulling her skirts down, but not before he glimpsed the old scars running up her right leg, angry, puckered marks that told of fire and pain. "I'm sorry," she said, flustered. "I didn't expect—" "Nothing to apologize for." He turned to leave, then stopped. "There's liniment in the barn, for sore muscles. I'll fetch it." When he returned, she was composed again, feet hidden beneath her skirts. He set the bottle on the table and retreated to the porch, giving her privacy while fighting the urge to offer more help. The next weeks brought a softening in the air as spring took hold. Elise rose earlier each day, practicing with Belle before Sam was even awake. She planted a kitchen garden, coaxing vegetables from the stubborn soil. In the evenings, she sat with Margaret, the two women talking quietly while Elise's needles clicked with the blue yarn he'd bought. "She's making you a sweater," his mother informed him one day. "For winter." "Waste of good yarn," Sam muttered, but his mother just smiled. The morning Elise appeared without her walking stick, Sam nearly choked on his coffee. She moved carefully but steadily, having practiced in secret until she could manage without support. "Thought I'd try," she said, color high in her cheeks. "Don't push too hard," he warned, but privately marveled at her progress. That afternoon brought the kind of peace the ranch rarely offered. Sam worked on repairing the chicken coop while Elise hung laundry, the white sheets billowing like sails in the breeze. Meadowlarks sang from the fence posts, and the air smelled of growing things. For a moment, it felt like what he'd imagined when he'd written to the matrimonial agency, a partnership, a shared life. The peace shattered with the first crack of thunder. Storm clouds had built while they worked, and now they released their fury. Rain fell in sheets, turning the yard to mud in minutes. Sam raced to help Elise with the laundry, but the wind caught the sheets, tangling them into sodden knots. "Leave them!" he shouted over the storm. But Elise struggled on, determined to save what she could. A particularly vicious gust knocked her off balance, and she fell hard into the mud. Sam reached her in 3 strides, pulling her up. Her face was streaked with mud and rain, her dress soaked through. For a moment they stood pressed together, his arms around her for balance, rain streaming over them both. "You're all right?" he asked, having to bend close to be heard. She nodded, then suddenly began to laugh, not hysteria, but genuine mirth at the absurdity of it all. The sound transformed her face, and Sam found himself smiling in response. They abandoned the laundry and ran for the house, slipping and sliding in the mud. Once inside, Elise stood dripping in the kitchen, still giggling. "I must look a fright," she said, pushing sodden hair from her face. "Like a drowned prairie dog," Sam agreed, which set her laughing again. It was the first moment of real ease between them, and it lingered even after she'd changed into dry clothes and they sat by the fire, sharing coffee and watching the storm rage outside. That night, nightmares found her. Sam woke to the sound of crying, not the quiet tears he'd heard before, but terrified sobs. He found her tangled in her bedsheets, calling out names he didn't recognize. "Elise!" He touched her shoulder gently. "Wake up. You're safe." She came awake with a gasp, eyes wild with remembered terror. "The fire! I couldn't get out. Marcus said he'd help, but he ran." "Shh!" Without thinking, Sam sat on the edge of her bed, gathering her against his chest. "There's no fire. You're in Wyoming. You're safe." She trembled against him, fingers clutching his shirt. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to wake you." "Nothing to be sorry for." Gradually, her breathing steadied. Sam became aware of how she fit against him, the warmth of her through the thin nightgown, the way her hair smelled of the lavender soap he'd bought on his last town trip. He should leave, knew it was improper to be here, but couldn't make himself move. "Marcus was my fiancé," she whispered into the darkness. "When the factory caught fire, I was working on the 3rd floor. The stairs collapsed. He was on the 2nd floor. He could have helped me, but he ran, left me there. A stranger pulled me out, but my leg, the doctor said I was lucky to keep it." Sam's arms tightened around her. "He was a coward. He came to see me once, in the hospital. Said he couldn't marry a cripple, that I'd be a burden. My family agreed. Too many mouths to feed already. And now I couldn't even work properly." The matter-of-fact way she said it made Sam's chest ache. He thought of his own losses, his father's death, the hard years that followed. But he'd always had the land, always had a place. What must it be like to lose everything, including the people who should protect you? "Their loss," he said, echoing his mother's words. Elise pulled back to look at him, her face pale in the moonlight streaming through the window. Something shifted in the air between them, a recognition of possibility. Sam found himself leaning closer, drawn by forces he couldn't name. He kissed her forehead, the gesture meant to comfort but carrying more weight than intended. She made a soft sound, somewhere between surprise and longing, and he felt the tremor run through her. "I should go," he said roughly, standing. "You need rest." "Sam?" Her voice stopped him at the door. "Thank you." He nodded without turning, not trusting himself to speak, and fled to his own room. Sleep didn't return that night. He lay staring at the ceiling, thinking of how she'd felt in his arms, the trust in her eyes when she'd shared her story, the way his name sounded on her lips. This was dangerous territory. He'd brought her here for practical reasons. Help for his mother, someone to manage the house. He hadn't expected this, whatever this was, the growing awareness of her presence, the way he found himself looking for her throughout the day, the protective anger that rose when he thought of those who'd abandoned her. Through the wall, he heard her moving around, probably unable to sleep either. In a few hours, dawn would break and they'd return to their careful dance of employer and employee. But something had shifted tonight, some barrier breached that couldn't be rebuilt. Sam turned over, punching his pillow into submission. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and cool. Through his window, he could see stars emerging from behind the clouds. And somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. There was always work on a ranch, always something that needed doing. But tonight, for just a moment, he'd held her and felt something he'd thought himself too practical to want, the possibility of a life that included more than mere survival. It was a dangerous thought for a careful man, but as sleep finally claimed him, Sam found himself hoping she'd dream of better things than fire and abandonment. Found himself thinking that maybe, just maybe, Wyoming could offer her something those back east couldn't, a place where broken things could mend, where worth wasn't measured in perfection, where even a cautious rancher might learn to hope again. The morning would come soon enough, with its demands and proprieties, but for now, in the quiet darkness, Sam allowed himself to imagine what it might be like to kiss her properly, to offer more than comfort, to build something together on this unforgiving land that demanded everything but occasionally, rarely, gave something precious in return. The morning after the storm dawned awkward and uncertain. Elise avoided Sam's eyes at breakfast, serving his eggs and biscuits with careful precision, but none of her usual quiet warmth. He retreated to the barn earlier than necessary, throwing himself into mucking stalls with uncommon vigor. For 3 days they danced around each other, polite strangers sharing a house, but nothing more. Margaret watched it all from her sickbed with growing frustration. "You're both fools," she told Elise bluntly when the younger woman brought her lunch. "Whatever happened, pretending it didn't won't make it go away." Elise's hands stilled on the quilt she was mending. I don't know what you mean. Child, I may be dying, but I'm not blind. Samuel looks at you like a spooked horse, and you're acting like you've done something shameful. Margaret's thin hand covered Elise's. Life's too short for this nonsense. That afternoon, a letter arrived that changed everything. Elise found it tucked under the door, her name written in familiar script. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Sister, it began. I hope this reaches you. I've thought of you every day since you left. Father regrets his harsh words. The factory owner paid compensation for the accident. It's not much, but it's yours by rights. Please come home. We miss you. Your loving brother, James. Elise sank onto the porch step, the letter crumpling in her grip. Home. The word that had meant everything once, then nothing. Now called to her again. She could leave this hard place, these awkward silences, this man who kissed her forehead then couldn't meet her eyes. Sam found her there an hour later, still clutching the letter. Bad news? She looked up at him, really looked at him for the first time in days. My family wants me back. They say they're sorry. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps disappointment, before his expression shuddered. That's good news, then. Is it? The question escaped before she could stop it. They stared at each other across the dusty yard. Sam shifted his weight, cleared his throat. Reckon that's for you to decide. Yes, she said softly. I reckon it is. That evening, she helped with the new calf, holding the lantern steady while Sam assisted the laboring cow. When the calf finally arrived, wet and bewildered, Elise laughed with delight as it struggled to its feet. First one you've seen born? Sam asked, smiling despite himself. Everything here is a first for me. She met his eyes meaningfully. Not all of them have been hard. They walked back to the house together. The silence between them different now, charged with possibility rather than avoidance. At the door, Sam stopped. Your family, he began. You thinking of going? I don't know. They hurt me badly, but they're still family. Family isn't just blood, Sam said roughly. It's the people who stand by you when things get hard. The way you think I'm a burden? The words burst out, sharp with days of hurt. The way you can barely look at me since... You think you're a burden? Sam stared at her incredulously. Woman, you've done more work these past months than hired hands I've paid good money. You've brought life back to this place. Made my mother smile when I thought she'd forgotten how. You think I kissed you out of pity? Then why have you been avoiding me? Because I'm a damn fool. The admission seemed to surprise him. Because I brought you here for practical reasons and now I can't think practical around you. Because when I held you that night, I wanted more than I had any right to want. Elise stepped closer, her chin lifting with the same determination she'd shown that first day at the station. What if I wanted it too? Thunder rumbled in the distance, another storm building on the horizon. Sam looked down at her, this woman who'd arrived broken but refused to stay that way, who faced each challenge with quiet courage, who made him hope for things he'd thought beyond reach. You deserve better than a rough rancher in a dying land, he said. I deserve someone who sees me as more than my limp. She countered. Do you? Instead of answering, he cupped her face in his work-worn hands and kissed her properly. Not the chaste comfort of before, but a kiss that spoke of loneliness ending, of recognition, of possibility. Elise made a soft sound and pressed closer, her hands fisting in his shirt. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Sam rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he said simply. Not for Ma, not for the ranch. Stay for this. I need to think, she whispered, but she didn't pull away. That night, the storm broke with a vengeance. Wind howled around the house, rattling windows and doors. Sam lay awake, wondering if he'd said too much, pushed too hard. Down the hall, Elise held her brother's letter and tried to imagine returning to Pennsylvania, to the family that had cast her out, to the life she'd known before. Near midnight, a crash from the barn sent Sam running into the storm. The wind had torn loose a section of roof, and rain poured in. panicking the horses. He struggled to calm them, to assess the damage, cursing the timing and his distraction. He didn't hear Elise until she was beside him, soaked within seconds but already reaching for Belle's halter. Together they moved the horses to the protected side of the barn, working in wordless synchronization. When the last animal was safe, they stood panting in the relative shelter, water streaming from their clothes. "You should be inside," Sam said. "So should you." She pushed wet hair from her face. "But here we are." Lightning illuminated her face, and he saw his own feelings reflected there, the pull between safety and risk, between the known and the possible. Without thinking, he reached for her again, backing her against the barn wall, kissing her with all the desperation of a man who'd forgotten he could want. She responded with equal fervor, months of careful distance evaporating in the storm's fury. When his hands found her waist, she gasped against his mouth, and he felt the shiver run through her that had nothing to do with cold. "Elise," he said roughly, pulling back. I know what we should do," she interrupted. "I've spent my whole life doing what I should, following rules, being proper, accepting my place." Her hands framed his face. "What if I want to do what I shouldn't, just once?" The barn offered privacy, the storm ensuring no one would venture out. Hay bales formed a makeshift shelter where they came together with desperate tenderness, clothes discarded with trembling hands, skin meeting skin in the lantern's dim glow. Sam traced the scars on her leg with gentle fingers, kissing away her embarrassment, while she mapped the marks hard living had left on him. They moved together carefully at first, mindful of her limitations. Then, with growing passion as trust replaced hesitation, the storm raged outside, but in their private world, there was only warmth and connection, whispered endearments and soft gasps. Two lonely people finding solace in each other. Afterward, they lay entwined in the hay, a horse blanket pulled over them. Elise traced patterns on Sam's chest, her usual reserve replaced by languid contentment. "This changes things," she said quietly. "Everything." He agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. "I can't go back to Pennsylvania now." He tightened his arms around her. "Is that the only reason you'll stay?" She raised up to look at him, her eyes soft in the lantern light. "No, but Sam, what happens tomorrow, when the storm passes and the world returns?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know I don't want to go back to the way things were. Do you?" She shook her head, then settled back against him. Outside, the storm began to ease, thunder grumbling away across the plains. Soon they'd have to dress, return to the house, face the questions that daylight would bring. But for now, they held each other in the quiet aftermath. Two people who'd found something unexpected in the vast loneliness of Wyoming. When they finally made their way back to the house, dawn was breaking. At her bedroom door, Sam caught her hand. "No more running," he said. "From either of us." Elise squeezed his fingers. "No more running." She agreed. Inside her room, she took her brother's letter and placed it in her trunk, unanswered. Whatever came next, she'd chosen her path. It might not lead where she'd once thought she wanted to go, but standing in the early morning light, still feeling Sam's touch on her skin, Elise knew she was exactly where she belonged. Dawn brought regret and confusion. Elise woke with her body aching in unfamiliar ways, hay still clinging to her hair despite her attempts to clean up. The euphoria of the night had faded, replaced by the cold reality of what they'd done. She was unmarried, dependent on Sam's goodwill, and now she'd given him what her mother had always warned her to save for marriage. At breakfast, Sam wouldn't meet her eyes, pushing food around his plate like a chastised boy. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and mourning after shame. "I should check the barn roof," he said abruptly, fleeing before she could respond. Elise's hands trembled as she cleared the dishes. What had she done? This wasn't Pennsylvania, where she at least knew the rules even if she couldn't follow them. Here, she'd thrown away her last claim to respectability for a night's comfort in a barn. Margaret sensed the change immediately. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Child." "I'm fine, Mrs. Carter," but her voice cracked on the lie. Margaret's keen eyes missed nothing. Samuel looks about the same. Whatever happened between you two, sulking won't fix it. But Elise couldn't face talking about it, not when shame burned hot in her chest. She threw herself into work instead, scrubbing floors that didn't need scrubbing, beating rugs with unnecessary force. By noon, her legs screamed in protest, but she welcomed the physical pain as distraction from the emotional turmoil. The gossip reached them by the third day. Tom Morrison had seen them leaving the barn at dawn, disheveled and obviously intimate. His wife Ruth wasted no time spreading the news, embellishing with each telling until the whole county buzzed with scandal. The crippled mail-order bride has shown her true colors. Ruth announced to anyone who'd listen, "Seduce that poor Sam Carter before they're even properly married. Mark my words. She'll be with child soon enough. Trying to trap him." The words reached Elise through Sarah Hutchins, who delivered eggs weekly and had always been kind. "I thought you should know what they're saying," Sarah said gently. "It's not right, but Ruth Morrison has a powerful voice in these parts." Elise sank onto a kitchen chair, the fight draining out of her. "Thank you for telling me. That is, will there be a wedding soon?" The question hung in the air. Elise had no answer. Sam had barely spoken to her since that night, clearly regretting their moment of passion. "I don't know," she admitted. That afternoon brought worse news. Ruth Morrison herself arrived, face gleaming with righteous indignation. Sam was in the far pasture, leaving Elise to face her alone. "I've spoken to Reverend Phillips," Ruth announced without preamble. "He's prepared to bring formal charges of moral turpitude before the church council. Living in sin, corrupting a good man, you've brought shame on this entire community." "We haven't," Elise began. But Ruth cut her off. "Don't lie to me, girl. You were seen. My Tom doesn't lie. You've got two choices. Leave quietly, or face public censure. The church council meets Saturday. If you're still here, we'll have the law remove you as a woman of loose morals." After Ruth left, Elise sat surrounded by the life she'd built. The mended clothes, the thriving garden, the home she'd made comfortable despite its roughness. All of it would be gone because of one night, one moment of weakness. She found her carpetbag and began to pack. Better to leave with some dignity intact than be driven out in shame. Her hands shook as she folded her few dresses. The blue sweater she'd knitted for Sam, but never given him. Margaret's voice stopped her. "Running away, are you?" Elise turned to find the older woman standing in the doorway, frail but fierce. "How did you—" "I'm dying, not deaf." Ruth Morrison's voice could wake the dead. Margaret moved carefully to sit on Elise's bed. "So you're going to let her win? What choice do I have? I've brought shame on your family. The only shame is my son's cowardice." Margaret said sharply, "Whatever happened between you two, he should be standing by you, not hiding in the fields." "He regrets it," Elise whispered. "I can see it every time he looks at me. What he regrets is being a fool. There's a difference." Margaret took Elise's hand. "I've watched you these months, child. You've brought life back to this place, and to my son. Don't let Ruth Morrison's poison drive you away." But Elise's resolve had crumbled. She'd survived being crippled, being abandoned, being unwanted. She wasn't sure she could survive being the fallen woman everyone whispered about. That evening, she left the packed bag by her door and served dinner as usual. Sam noticed. She saw his eyes track to her room and back, but said nothing. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Finally, as she cleared the plates, he spoke. "You're leaving." It wasn't a question. Elise nodded, not trusting her voice. "Because of what people are saying?" "Because it's best," she managed. "For everyone." Sam's chair scraped back violently. "Best for who? For Ruth Morrison? For the gossips in town?" "For you!" The words burst out. "I've ruined your reputation, brought scandal to your door. You never asked for this." "I never asked for you either," he said harshly, and Elise flinched. But he continued. Never asked for someone who'd make me feel again. Make me want things I'd given up on. Never asked to care what happens to you. But here we are. Caring isn't enough, Elise said quietly. Not when the whole county thinks I'm a loose woman. You deserve better? Stop telling me what I deserve. Sam's control finally snapped. You think I care what Ruth Morrison says? You think her opinion matters more than... He broke off, running a hand through his hair. I've been a coward, hiding from what happened, from what I feel. But don't you dare leave because of them. Then give me a reason to stay. Elise challenged, tears threatening. Because right now, I feel like that scared girl at the train station again, unwanted, broken, a mistake you're too polite to send back. Sam crossed to her in 2 strides, catching her shoulders. You're not broken. You're the strongest person I know. And you're not a mistake. You're the best thing that's happened to this ranch, to Ma, to me. His voice roughened. I'm no good with words. Elise, but that night in the barn, it wasn't just desire. It was recognition, like I'd been waiting for you without knowing it. Then why have you been avoiding me? Because I'm a fool who didn't know how to make it right. Because I took advantage. You didn't, she interrupted fiercely. I chose it. I chose you. But now the whole county knows. And then marry me. The words hung between them, shocking in their simplicity. Elise stared up at him, searching his face. Not because of gossip. Sam continued urgently. Not to satisfy Ruth Morrison or anyone else, because I can't imagine this place without you, because when I saw that bag by your door, I couldn't breathe. His hands gentled on her shoulders. Marry me because I love you. Because you love me too, even if neither of us has said it proper. Elise's tears spilled over. Sam, I know it's not the proposal you dreamed of. I know I'm just a rough rancher with a failing ranch and a dying mother. But I promise you this, you'll never be unwanted again. Never be treated as less than, not while I'm breathing. Through the window, she could see storm clouds building again on the horizon. It seemed Wyoming was never done testing them, but standing in Sam's grip, seeing the truth in his eyes, Elise felt something she hadn't in months. Hope. The church council meets Saturday, she said softly. Then we'll be married Friday. His thumbs wiped her tears. If you'll have me. Instead of answering with words, Elise rose on her toes and kissed him, pouring all her fear and hope and love into the contact. When they parted, both breathing unsteadily, she whispered, No more running! No more running! He agreed, pulling her close. Outside, lightning flickered in the distance, but inside the small ranch house, 2 people held each other and began to plan a future built on something stronger than respectability, built on choice, on courage, and on the kind of love that blooms in the most unlikely ground. Friday dawned crisp and clear, the first day without threatening clouds in a week. Reverend Phillips, a kindly man who'd traveled from the neighboring county, performed the simple ceremony in the ranch house parlor. Sarah Hutchins stood as witness alongside her husband, both having defied Ruth Morrison's dire warnings about associating with that woman. Elise wore her best dress, a faded blue cotton that Margaret had helped her alter the night before. Sam had cleaned up remarkably, his usually unruly hair tamed with pomade, wearing his father's wedding suit that smelled faintly of cedar and memory. Do you, Samuel, take this woman? The Reverend's words washed over them as they stood before the fireplace, hands clasped between them. When it came time for the ring, Sam produced his mother's thin gold band. Margaret had pressed it into his hand that morning with tears in her eyes. Your father gave this to me 43 years ago, she'd said. It's seen hard times and good, perfect for a ranch marriage. As Sam slipped the ring onto Elise's finger, she noticed his hands trembling slightly. This rough cowboy who could gentle wild horses and face down storms was nervous about a simple gold band. The tenderness of it made her throat tight. I now pronounce you husband and wife. Their kiss was brief, mindful of the audience, but Sam's hand lingered on her cheek as he pulled away. Mrs. Carter. he murmured, and Elise felt the name settle around her like armor against whatever Ruth Morrison and her allies might bring. The wedding breakfast was modest but cheerful. Sarah had brought a cake, and even Margaret managed to join them at the table, wrapped in quilts but smiling. As they ate, Elise found herself stealing glances at the ring on her finger, still hardly believing it was real. "Stop looking so worried," Margaret told her. "You're married now. Let Ruth Morrison choke on that fact." But Elise's worry proved justified. The following week brought new challenges as word of their marriage spread. Some in town, like Sarah and the schoolmistress Mrs. Palmer, offered quiet congratulations, but Ruth Morrison's faction was louder. "Married in haste to cover their sin," Ruth proclaimed at the general store. "Mark my words, we'll see the fruit of their wickedness soon enough." The speculation about Elise's potential pregnancy followed her everywhere. Women watched her figure for signs of thickening, whispered when she declined coffee at church socials, counted months on their fingers with knowing looks. But as weeks turned to months with no sign of a child, the whispers changed. "Barren," they said, "God's punishment for their impropriety." The words cut deep, especially when Elise's monthly courses continued their painful regularity, each one a reminder that the night in the barn had consequences beyond gossip. She threw herself into other work instead. Mrs. Palmer, impressed by Elise's careful letters and patient demeanor, asked if she might help with the youngest students when school resumed. It wasn't formal teaching. That required certificates Elise didn't have, but she could assist with reading and writing, help the little ones who struggled. "You have a gift," Mrs. Palmer told her after the first week. "The children trust you, perhaps because you understand what it's like to struggle." The schoolhouse work gave Elise purpose beyond the ranch, a place where her limp didn't matter and her quick mind was valued. The children didn't care about Ruth Morrison's gossip. They cared that Mrs. Carter helped them sound out difficult words and never laughed at their mistakes. Sam, for his part, had thrown himself into improving the ranch with renewed vigor. He built a proper chicken coop, expanded the garden, and started construction on a small addition to the house. "For when Ma needs more care," he said. Though Elise noticed it could easily become a child's room, their nights had found a gentle rhythm. After the explosive passion of the barn, their marital intimacy was quieter, deeper, two people learning each other's bodies with patience and care. Sam traced her scars like they were maps to treasure. Elise discovered he was ticklish behind his left ear and that he made soft sounds of contentment when she ran her fingers through his hair. But as autumn approached, a shadow fell over their happiness. Margaret's health declined rapidly, and Dr. Hawkins' visits became more frequent. "Her heart's giving out," he told them quietly. "Make her comfortable. That's all we can do now." Elise became Margaret's primary nurse, spending hours at her bedside, reading aloud or simply holding her increasingly frail hand. The older woman faced her decline with the same steel she'd shown all her life. "I want to thank you," Margaret said one afternoon, her voice barely a whisper. "For what?" Elise adjusted her pillows gently. "For bringing my son back to life. He'd been just existing since his father died, going through motions. You changed that. He changed me too," Elise said softly. "Gave me a home when I had none." "No, child. You made this a home. There's a difference." Margaret's eyes, still sharp despite her body's weakness, fixed on Elise's face. "I need to tell you something. About children." Elise's hand stilled. "Margaret?" "Hush. Listen. I lost 3 babies between Samuel and the one that finally killed me trying. Each loss nearly broke me. Sam doesn't know. His father thought it would burden him." She gripped Elise's hand with surprising strength. "If God doesn't bless you with children, it's not punishment. You hear me? Sometimes bodies just can't, no matter how much hearts want." Tears slipped down Elise's cheeks. "The doctor back east said the damage from the accident. He wasn't sure I could. Then you and Sam will build a different kind of family, the kind made of choice and love, not just blood." Margaret smiled faintly. "You've already started." Half the school children in town adore you. That's its own motherhood. That evening, Elise found Sam building furniture in the barn, small chairs and desks for the schoolhouse. He looked up when she entered, sawdust in his hair and a tentative smile on his face. Thought the little ones might learn better if they could reach their desks proper, he explained. Elise crossed to him, not caring about the sawdust, and wrapped her arms around his waist. I love you, she said into his chest. It was the first time either had said it plainly since their hurried engagement. His arms came around her, strong and sure. What brought this on? Your mother, this, she gestured at the half-finished furniture. You, building futures for other people's children when we might not. Hey. He tilted her chin up. We've got each other. That's enough, more than enough. They stood holding each other in the barn where everything had changed, now transformed by marriage and time into something sanctified rather than scandalous. Outside, the autumn wind carried the scent of coming winter, of endings and beginnings mixed together. A week later, Elise was teaching little Amy Morrison, Ruth's granddaughter. Ironically, when Sam appeared at the schoolhouse door, his face told her everything. Go, Mrs., Palmer said gently. I'll manage here. They made it back just in time. Margaret was conscious but fading. Her breathing labored. She reached for both their hands, linking them together with her own. Take care of each other, she whispered. Promise me. We promise. Ma, Sam said, his voice thick. Margaret smiled, her eyes moving between them. My good children, my dear ones. Her grip loosened, and with a small sigh, she was gone. The funeral brought the whole county, even Ruth Morrison maintaining respectful silence in the face of death. Elise stood beside Sam at the graveside, his hand tight in hers, both of them dry-eyed for now. The tears would come later, in private, where grief could be honored properly. As the crowd dispersed, several of the schoolchildren approached, placing small wildflower bouquets on the fresh grave. Mrs. Margaret was nice, Amy Morrison said solemnly. She gave me peppermints. It was such a simple tribute, but it broke through Elise's composure. Sam's arm came around her, steady as the mountains on the horizon. Home, he asked quietly. Home, she agreed. They walked back to the ranch house together, leaning on each other. Two people who'd found love in the unlikeliest circumstances and built something strong enough to weather any storm. The house would be quieter now, emptier, but it was still home, still theirs, still filled with the love Margaret had recognized and blessed. That night, as they lay together in the bed that had been Sam's parents', Elise told him about her conversation with Margaret, about bodies that couldn't do what hearts wanted. If we can't have children, she began, then we'll love the ones who need it. Sam finished. Like Ma said, family by choice. They held each other close as winter's first snow began to fall, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, running the ranch without Margaret, facing the future as just the two of them. But tonight, they had each other, and that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Winter held the ranch in its icy grip, but worse than the cold was the arrival of Marcus Whelan. Elise saw him first through the kitchen window, a well-dressed man dismounting from a hired horse, his movements familiar in a way that made her stomach clench. She recognized him instantly despite the years. The same angular face, the same calculated smile, the same eyes that had once looked at her with love and then with disgust. Her former fiancé had found her. Elise, he said when she opened the door, his gaze traveling over her with an assessment that made her skin crawl. You're looking, well, Mr. Whelan. She kept the door partially closed, her body blocking his view of the interior. Why are you here? Is that any way to greet an old friend? His smile didn't reach his eyes. I heard you'd married. Some cowboy. They thought I'd come pay my respects. Sam appeared behind her, having heard the voices. Who's this? Marcus extended his hand with practiced charm. Marcus Whelan. I knew your wife back in Pennsylvania. Before her. Accident. The way he said accident made Elise flinch. Sam's eyes narrowed, but he shook the offered hand briefly. State your business. Mr. Whelan. Direct. I like that. Marcus's smile turned predatory. I'm here about a delicate matter. Perhaps we could discuss it inside? The wind is rather harsh. Against her better judgment, Elise stepped aside. Marcus entered like he owned the place, his eyes cataloging everything, the simple furniture, the modest surroundings, the evidence of a hard-working but hardly prosperous life. Coffee? Elise offered stiffly. How domestic you've become. Marcus settled into a chair uninvited. Quite different from the factory girl I knew, though I suppose options were limited, given your condition. Sam's jaw tightened. You've got 5 minutes to explain why you're here. Marcus pulled out a leather portfolio. Business, Mr. Carter. You see, there were certain promises made between Elise and myself, agreements. When she fled Pennsylvania, she left some matters unresolved. There were no promises, Elise said sharply. You made that clear when you broke our engagement. But there was the matter of the money. Marcus produced a paper. The advance I gave your father for our wedding, $500. A significant sum that was never returned when you defaulted on our arrangement. Elise sank into a chair. My father never told me about any money. Nevertheless, the debt exists. With interest over 3 years, it's now $700. Marcus's voice was silk over steel. Unless you'd prefer I handle this through legal channels, I imagine the local magistrate would be quite interested in a case of fraud. This is extortion, Sam growled. This is business. Marcus leaned back, supremely confident. Though I might be persuaded to forgive the debt, given the right incentive. His eyes lingered on Elise in a way that made his meaning crystal clear. Sam was on his feet instantly, fists clenched. Get out of my house. I'm staying at the hotel in town, Marcus said smoothly, rising. You have a week to consider my offer. After that, I'll file charges, fraud, breach of contract. Such scandal for a schoolteacher's reputation. He tipped his hat mockingly. Good day. After he left, Elise remained frozen in her chair. $700. We don't have that kind of money. We'll figure something out. Sam knelt beside her. He can't prove anything if your father took the money without telling you. You don't understand. Marcus has connections, lawyers. He destroyed my reputation once before. He'll do it again. Her voice broke. I've brought nothing but trouble to your door. Stop. Sam gripped her shoulders. This isn't your fault. We'll fight this together. But Marcus's presence poisoned the town like a disease. He spent his days at the hotel bar, spinning tales of the factory girl who'd entrapped him, taken his money, and fled. How she'd seduced a simple rancher to hide her past. How she was nothing but a crippled opportunist. By week's end, even Elise's supporters were wavering. Mrs. Palmer suggested, apologetically, that perhaps Elise should take a brief leave from the schoolhouse until matters were resolved. The general storekeeper presented their bill with unusual insistence. Whispers followed her everywhere. The breaking point came when Sam found Elise in the barn, a bruise darkening her wrist. What happened? His voice was deadly quiet. It's nothing. I fell. Don't lie to me. Did he touch you? Elise's composure cracked. He cornered me behind the mercantile. Said if I was nice to him, like old times, he'd forgive the debt. When I tried to leave, he grabbed me. She met Sam's furious gaze. I got away, but Sam, he won't stop. Not until he's destroyed everything we've built. Sam was out the door before she could stop him. He found Marcus in the hotel saloon, regaling a crowd with another embellished tale. Without warning, Sam grabbed him by the collar and hauled him outside. Touch my wife again and I'll kill you. The words were calm, factual. Marcus straightened his coat, unperturbed. Assault. Another charge to add to the list. You're making this too easy. Carter? The fight was brief but vicious. Sam's rage gave him strength. But Marcus fought dirty, a city man's cunning against ranch-bred directness. When Tom Morrison and others pulled them apart, both men were bloodied, and Marcus was already claiming Sam had attacked him unprovoked. The sheriff, summoned from the county seat, had no choice but to arrest Sam. The trial was set for the following week, with Marcus pressing charges of assault and threatening to add cattle theft based on information received if the debt wasn't paid. Elise mortgaged everything they had, but it wasn't enough. The ranch itself was all that remained, and losing it would mean losing everything. She spent her days trying to find character witnesses while her nights were filled with dread. The trial was a circus. Marcus played the wounded party perfectly, his city lawyer painting Sam as a violent man who'd married a woman of questionable virtue and now refused to honor her debts. Elise watched it all with growing despair until the prosecutor called her to testify. Mrs. Carter. The prosecutor began, his tone suggesting the title was dubious. Is it true you were engaged to Mr. Whelan? Yes. And that you broke this engagement after suffering your injury? He broke the engagement. He said he couldn't marry a cripple. Yet he'd given your family money in good faith, money that was never returned. I knew nothing about any money. But you fled Pennsylvania shortly after, didn't you? Came out here, found yourself a husband willing to overlook your deficits? The questioning grew more brutal, each word designed to paint her as a scheming woman who'd used her disability to trap first Marcus, then Sam. When they finally allowed her to tell her side, the fire, the abandonment, Marcus's cruel rejection, the prosecutor dismissed it as a convenient tale. The truth is, Elise said suddenly, her voice cutting through his latest insinuation, Marcus Whelan is a coward who left me to die in a burning building. He's a man who promised love and delivered cruelty. He took advantage of my father's poverty and my trust, and when I was no longer perfect enough for his vanity, he discarded me. She stood, despite the prosecutor's protests, and faced the packed courtroom. Yes, I came west looking for a new life. Yes, I married Sam Carter, not because I trapped him or tricked him, but because he saw me as more than my limp, because he offered me honest work and honest love. Her voice gained strength. I've taught your children, nursed Mrs. Carter in her final days, worked this land until my hands bled. I've been a good wife, a good neighbor, a good citizen. If that makes me a woman of questionable virtue in your eyes, then perhaps it's your virtue that needs questioning. The courtroom erupted. Some women applauded while others gasped at her boldness. The judge called for order, but something had shifted. When Sarah Hutchins stood to testify about Elise's character, others followed. Even some who'd believed the gossip spoke of small kindnesses. A meal brought during sickness, patient help with a struggling child, quiet dignity in the face of cruel whispers. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, they acquitted Sam of assault charges, ruling it justifiable defense of his wife. As for the debt, they declared it a civil matter outside their jurisdiction, essentially telling Marcus to pursue it elsewhere if he dared. Marcus left town that night, but not before leaving a final threat. This isn't over, he told Elise when he found her alone at the wagon. I'll be back. No, she said quietly. You won't. Because if you come near me or mine again, Sam won't be the only one you need to fear. I'm not the frightened girl you abandoned. I survived the fire, survived the pain, survived losing everything. I can survive you. Something in her eyes, steel forged in flame, made him step back. Without another word, he mounted his hired horse and rode away. That night, Elise and Sam sat on the porch despite the cold, wrapped in quilts and each other. The stars were brilliant overhead, unmarred by city smoke or eastern haze. You were magnificent today, Sam said, like an avenging angel. I was terrified. She leaned into his warmth. But I couldn't let him win, not again. He won't be back. How can you be sure? Sam pressed a kiss to her temple. Because cowards don't face people who found their strength. And you, Mrs. Carter, are the strongest person I know. They sat in comfortable silence, the ranch spreading peaceful around them. Tomorrow there would be fences to mend, both literal and figurative. Some in town would never fully accept them, but many would. Had already begun to. "No more running," Elise murmured, echoing their old promise. "No more running." Sam agreed. "Just building. Together." The wind carried the scent of snow and possibility. Inside the house, a fire crackled warmly, waiting to welcome them home. They'd won more than a court case today. They'd won the right to their life together, earned through courage and truth and the kind of love that refuses to yield. As they finally went inside, Elise paused to look back at the vast Wyoming sky. Somewhere to the east, her past was finally, truly behind her. Here, under these endless stars, her future stretched bright and certain, built on stronger foundations than perfection, built on choice, on fighting for each other, on the daily decision to stay and love and grow. The door closed softly behind them, shutting out the cold and keeping in the warmth. Home. Really, truly, finally home. 1 year later, spring returned to Wyoming with unusual gentleness. The ranch had transformed under Sam and Elise's partnership. New fencing stretched across the pastures. The garden had tripled in size, and a fresh coat of paint made the house gleam in the morning sun. Elise stood in the schoolhouse doorway, watching her students scatter for the day. She'd returned to teaching after the trial, and while some families had withdrawn their children, others had enrolled there specifically because they wanted them taught by a woman who understood struggle and perseverance. "Mrs. Carter," a small voice called out. She turned to see Timothy Wells, a boy of 7 with a twisted foot from a birthing injury. He limped toward her, clutching a paper. "I wrote my letters just like you showed me." Elise knelt to his level, examining his careful penmanship. "These are wonderful. Timothy, you're improving so quickly." The boy beamed, then said quietly, "Ma says I'm lucky to have a teacher who understands about walking different. We all walk our own paths," Elise told him gently. "Some are just more interesting than others." As Timothy limped away, his mother nodded gratefully to Elise. Word had spread about the teacher who helped children with difficulties, who never made them feel less than whole. It had become her calling within a calling. At home, Sam was working on his latest project, a ramp for the porch steps. Elise's walking had improved considerably, but winter ice still posed challenges, and he was determined to make their home as accessible as possible. "How was school?" he asked, not looking up from his sawing. "Good." The Hendricks enrolled their daughter today. Elise settled on the porch swing, enjoying the sight of her husband at work. "That makes 32 students now." Sam grinned. "Going to need a bigger schoolhouse soon. Mrs. Palmer's already talking to the town council about it." Elise hesitated, then added, "She wants me to get my teaching certificate. Says there's a program in Cheyenne that would accept my experience in lieu of formal education." Sam set down his tools and joined her on the swing. "That's wonderful. You should do it. It would mean being away for 6 weeks in the summer. Then I'll be here when you get back." He took her hand, running his thumb over her wedding ring. "Elise, you were born to teach. Don't let anything hold you back." That evening brought an unexpected visitor. A woman appeared at their gate, travel-worn and carrying a small bundle. She was young, perhaps 19, with the unmistakable look of someone running from something. "Please," she said when Elise answered the door. I heard you help people who are different." It was then Elise noticed what the bundle was: a baby, and the young woman's left arm hung useless at her side. "Come in," Elise said immediately. "You're safe here." The woman's story unfolded over tea. Mary Bennett, injured in a factory accident similar to Elise's own, abandoned by her family when she bore a child out of wedlock. She'd heard about the ranch in Wyoming where a crippled woman had found acceptance and thought maybe, "I can work," Mary said desperately, echoing Elise's own words from that train platform 2 years ago. "I just need a chance." Sam and Elise exchanged glances. They'd been talking about hiring help for the expanding ranch, and here was someone who needed exactly what they could offer. Not charity, but opportunity. "The bunkhouse is empty," Sam said finally. "It's not much, but it's warm and dry. Work starts at dawn." Mary's tears of relief were all the thanks they needed. As spring turned to summer, the ranch became a small community unto itself. Mary proved a hard worker, managing the chickens and garden one-handed with clever adaptations. Her baby, little Catherine, brought unexpected joy to the house, her gurgles and smiles filling the silence Margaret's passing had left. Other workers followed, men down on their luck, families seeking fresh starts. Not all stayed, but those who did formed a loyal crew who understood that the Carter Ranch judged people by their character, not their limitations. The day Elise left for Cheyenne to pursue her certificate, half the town turned out to see her off. Even Ruth Morrison, subdued since the trial, managed a stiff nod of acknowledgement. 6 weeks, Sam murmured against her hair as they said goodbye at the station. "I'll write every day." "Liar." She laughed through her tears. "You hate writing." "For you, I'll learn to love it." The separation was hard but worthwhile. Elise threw herself into her studies, her years of practical experience making the theoretical aspects easier to grasp. She wrote Sam about the other students, the professors who initially doubted her abilities, the triumph of passing each examination. Sam's letters were shorter but no less meaningful. Updates on the ranch, Mary's progress, Catherine's first tooth, and always, always, ending with, "The house is too quiet without you. Come home soon." She returned with her certificate and a newfound confidence. The school board, impressed by her credentials and experience, offered her the position of head teacher when Mrs. Palmer announced her retirement. "You did it," Sam said that night, holding her close in their bed. "I'm so proud of you." "We did it," she corrected. "None of this would have happened without you believing in me." That winter, a letter arrived that Elise had never expected to receive. Her brother James wrote that their parents had died in a flu outbreak. He was sorry for everything. He said, sorry for their cowardice, their abandonment. He wanted to know his sister again, if she could forgive. Elise stared at the letter for a long time before penning her reply. She wrote of her life in Wyoming, her husband, her teaching. She wrote of forgiveness, but also of distance. Some wounds healed but left scars that remembered. She welcomed correspondence but made it clear her home was here now. Spring came again, and with it, another unexpected arrival, a child of 10. Elizabeth Hayes, removed from her family by the state due to neglect and abuse. She walked on leg braces, the result of untreated illness, and had the wary eyes of someone who'd learned not to trust. "Would you consider taking her in?" the state representative asked. "We heard about your ranch, how you help people. She needs a special kind of home." Elise looked at the girl, saw herself at that age, frightened, different, unwanted. She looked at Sam, saw his small nod. "Yes," she said simply. "Welcome home, Elizabeth." It wasn't easy. Elizabeth tested every boundary. Sure, she'd be sent away like always. But patience and consistency worked their magic. The girl slowly bloomed under their care, her sharp mind soaking up Elise's teaching, her wounded heart beginning to trust. The night Elizabeth first called them Ma and Pa accidentally, then blushing furiously, Sam and Elise held each other and cried. They might not have children of their blood, but they had built a family nonetheless. The ranch prospered. The school grew. Lives were changed, one person at a time. And at the center of it all, two people who'd found each other across miles and pain and circumstance continued to choose each other daily. On a warm spring morning, exactly 3 years after Elise stepped off that train, they stood on the hill overlooking their land. The ranch spread below them, the house with its new additions, the expanded barns, the bunkhouse where Mary sang to Catherine, the yard where Elizabeth practiced walking without her braces. "Remember when you whispered you could work? You'd stay?" Sam asked, his arm around her waist. Elise leaned into him, her limp barely noticeable now except when she was very tired. Best promise I ever made. No, Sam disagreed, turning her to face him. The best promise was when you said no more running. She reached up to touch his weathered face. This man who'd given her everything by seeing her as enough. I did stay, she whispered, echoing their beginning. And I'm loved as I am, as you are. He confirmed, kissing her gently. Always, just as you are. Below them, Elizabeth called out that breakfast was ready. She'd taken over much of the cooking. Showing real talent, Mary was hanging laundry while Catherine played at her feet. The hired men were already working in the far pastures. Life bustled with purpose and belonging. They walked back down the hill together, Sam matching his pace to hers as always. At the door, Elise paused, looking back at the vast Wyoming sky that had once seemed so foreign and now felt like freedom itself. She'd traveled so far to find home, not just the physical journey from Pennsylvania, but the harder journey from broken to whole, from unwanted to cherished, from surviving to living fully. The crippled mail-order bride who'd whispered desperate promises at a train station had become a teacher, a mother by choice, a woman who'd helped build something beautiful from dust and determination and love. "Coming, Ma," Elizabeth called from inside, and Elise smiled. "Coming, sweetheart," she called back, and stepped through the door into the life she'd never dared dream of but had fought to claim nonetheless. Home, family, purpose, love. All of it hard-won, all of it precious, all of it proof that sometimes the most beautiful stories begin with the most broken people finding strength in each other's scars. The door closed gently behind them, but their story continued, in every child taught, every person helped, every day chosen to stay and love and grow, a Wild West love story. Indeed, but more than that, a human story of resilience, acceptance, and the families we create when we dare to see beyond limitations to possibilities. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the dusty trails and open hearts of the Old West. I hope Sam and Elise's story touched your heart as much as it did mine. Where are you listening to this tale tonight? Drop a comment below and let me know, whether you're driving through the mountains, cozied up at home, or maybe even somewhere out on the prairie under the stars. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of love, courage, and redemption in the American frontier. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Sam and Elise's journey. What moment spoke to you the most? Until next time, partners, keep riding toward your own sunset. And remember, sometimes the strongest people are those who've been broken and chose to heal anyway.